Welcome and thank you for joining us today. My name is David Benson and I'm the Director of Agency Sales UK here at Google and previously the executive sponsor of the Black Googler Network for EMEA. And it's my pleasure to host this Fireside chat today to shed some light on how we're building sustainable equity, a topic I'm incredibly passionate about. With me, I've got Geoff and Ola. So maybe we could start off with an introduction. Ola, please would you like to introduce yourself and tell us a bit about yourself and why this topic is so close to your heart?
Thank you, David. It's great to be here. Well, I joined Google exactly a year ago, to lead the hiring of folks into our global business organization and our global advisory functions, essentially our non-tech hiring into EMEA. A lot of people think that Google is largely hiring tech talent, but there is a wealth of opportunity for those with a non-tech background. So really key to know that across sales and marketing, across legal, and even human resources, POPs, there are a number of opportunities there. This is important to me. This topic is incredibly important to me because it is personal for me. You know, I have two young boys, aged 10 and 7. And I'm well aware, like most people of color, most Black people, of the unbridgeable gap between you and your future you. So it's really important that I show up at work, I show up personally and professionally in this space. I think then with my staffing hat, when it comes to recruiting individuals into the organization, we want to make sure that Google represents the communities in which we operate in and represents the all-important user that we are trying to connect with.
Amazing. Thank you so much. And Geoff, would you just like to introduce yourself and say a few words about why you are so passionate about this topic?
Yeah, hi. So my name's Geoff. I'm an engineering director at YouTube based in Zurich. And I work with YouTube creators trying to make them successful on the YouTube platform. And I've been at Google now for 4 years. In addition to my engineering job, I've also been involved with helping the Zurich site, looking at how we can improve gender representation over the last few years. And recently have taken on the inclusion and respect exec sponsor role for the overall site. And this is looking at how we can best support the over 4,000 Googlers based in Zurich as to how we can make it a diverse and inclusive site. And it's something that I've just spent almost a decade working on across a couple of companies now, and something I'm deeply passionate about. And this year, there's really been a big focus on racial equity, and I felt that it would be great to be able to contribute even in a small way. And so I've been on the racial equity working group with David and Ola for the last couple of months.
Amazing, Geoff, and very humble too. As a member with you on those groups, I can say your impact's been massive and your contribution has been really, really welcome, asking those challenging questions that make a difference. And so let's think about then racial equity. And I'd love to speak to you both about your reflection on the progress that has been made in EMEA specifically in the recent years. So if we say that the definition of equity is a situation where everybody is treated in a way which is fair and equal, how much progress have we made on this? Ola, do you want to kick us off?
Thank you, David, for that question. From my seat, this year has been pivotal in our region, in EMEA. We've all seen the media coverage of the violent and racist attacks against the Black community. And I think it forced the entire world to wake up and reckon with the structural and systemic racism that underrepresented minorities, Black people face every day. I think over many generations, we haven't really articulated the problem statement as clearly as we are now. And there's a real opportunity to seize the moment. It saddens us all that it took this, right? We had to come to this to suddenly bring this to the forefront. But it's also called for allyship, deep allyship, to make this moment count. And that's how everyone involved in hiring at Google is thinking about this unique opportunity. I would say for myself personally, I was hired a year ago, and this conversation was prevalent in every meeting that I had. It actually stunned me, I must be honest. So I feel like Google was already on a journey, and that journey is just being crystallized now with our public commitments. If you're talking specifically about progress in recent years, I think if we look at the industry in general, there are green shoots, right? We're trying. The tech industry is holding itself accountable. Google was the first tech company to share data in this area externally in 2014. And for the second year in a row, we can see increases in the representation of Black hires across the region. This accountability, I think, really stems from leadership accountability. Folks like yourself, folks like Geoff, are pretty common through the organization. I think we're quite delighted to find ourselves in that position. And I think that leadership accountability is also something that I'd love us to touch on as we have our chat this morning.
Absolutely. And, I know that sort of in that progress, we've made a lot of expansion in the area of outreach programs. Perhaps you'd just like to just give us a few words on those, because I know that we've really changed the number of doors and how we reach out to the different communities to make sure we capture all the amazing talent out there.
Yes, we have. I think we have significantly expanded our outreach programs. In this area specifically, across the spectrum of diversity, we've partnered with the Black Young Professionals Network at their leadership event this year. There's also Black Tech Fest that we've also participated in. And I've literally just come from a meeting where we are looking at the year ahead and how we continue and build on this momentum and elevate Google in this space. So definitely the outreach programs, making sure that individuals see themselves here at Google, right? It's a well-known fact that people find us intimidating from the outside looking in, and people have to ask themselves, can they see themselves here at Google? And it's our job and the job of the entire team within the staffing function to really look out into the world and bridge that gap.
Brilliant. And Geoff, what have you seen from your side? You've been so involved in this, like you say, for 10 years. What would you say the big shifts you've seen are?
Yeah, I think the big thing that I've seen particularly this year is a shift from a sort of passive acceptance of it's okay, I don't personally see any problems, often from those in the majority groups, through to now much more active awareness of this is something where we do have an industry-wide systematic issues and that we all need to actively work to address. The other thing that I'm seeing much more of is a shift around intersectionality, and this is looking at how multiple efforts can overlap. And one of the highlights for me in the last couple of months is watching the Women At group in Zurich spend time specifically highlighting the issues that Black women experience through hosting a series of guest talks and of both internal and external speakers. The other big shift has been allyship has become much more front and center. In the past, there was work around setting up ERG groups, and now there's a lot more of how we actually get other allies across the business to be able to help. And this is an area where I have a lot of hope for the future where we can move the silent majority from inaction to actively participating.
Absolutely, and that's something I've really noticed as well. I'm as an exec sponsor of the BGN, I was very used to turning up to meetings with other Black Googlers saying, how are we going to change things? And really seeing that shift now to seeing a multitude of allies and white faces in the room who are all looking to lift with us. And I found that hugely lifting and empowering. So thank you for that. But you mentioned earlier about the role of leadership in driving this change and how important that is. And in our commitment to racial equality, our CEO Sundar, he stated Google is setting goals to improve leadership representation, which is really significant for us because our leadership really do beat the drum and drive change here at Google. So Ola and Geoff, what are some of the examples of representation that you've seen within your orgs?
In my organization, staffing sits within Google's people operations function, or HR as many other companies refer to it. And we believe that particularly in an organization such as people operations, we need our leadership to be representative, not only in our interactions with potential Googlers in the market, but also the thousands of Googlers we interact with every day. And these interactions run the gambit, right? It could be anything from our work in the diversity space to compensation, performance management, and of course, my world, staffing. I think I'd love to tell you a story. Just before lockdown, I was able to get to Mountain View and join a POPs Director Summit. And I think in all of my career, it was the first time I turned up at a leadership summit and there was representation. I saw people who looked just like me. And there wasn't just one other, there were multiple. And that for me was very encouraging in my first quarter at Google. I'd like to call out specifically our global head of diversity, Melanie Parker, who is Black. And to me, that is an incredible asset because not only is this her life's work, it's also her life. So Melanie is leaning into her lived experience. And to be able to have that voice at the table when we look at things as a function, right? I feel incredibly grateful for that.
Amazing. Geoff, what about you?
Yeah, this is an area where we have much room to grow within the tech org. There are very few Black tech directors across EMEA, and it's an area where we've been actively partnering with our staffing teams on how we can improve sourcing candidates. And we've been also looking internally at how manager progression has been working for our Black Googlers. And this is an area where we can and will be doing more so that we're able to promote from within. I think this is an area where our business org has been doing better and have had the opportunity to work with a number of fantastic senior leaders such as David and Ola and as part of our work on racial equity. So it is an area where we can make change, and I think where we have a lot of room to make change.
Brilliant. And thank you, Geoff. Let's talk a bit about some of the challenges we've faced then when it comes to this diverse hiring and employee retention. Ola, so you're in staffing. Do you want to kick us off with this one?
Yes. It's no secret. It's no secret that there are groups that have been historically underrepresented in the tech industry. I think Google is very transparent about where we are making progress and where we acknowledge that we still have a lot of work to do. That's the entire point of the annual diversity report, right? Data informs everything that we do. That's not going to come as a surprise to any of our listeners. But we use data to ensure that there's fairness in the process, there's fairness in the outcomes, and we use data to build a more representative workforce. We want to make sure things like retention, like progression and compensation are equitable. And the fairest place to start is really by looking at the data. Since we started looking at our data in 2014, we've seen large gains for women in tech globally, and we've seen steady gains in representation for communities that we focused on. Last year, we saw the largest increase for Black plus representation at Google since we began publishing. But we've got to continue to pay close attention to this. We can't take our foot off the gas, right? We've got to continue to attract and assess talent at every stage of our process. Some of the challenges that we've faced is making sure that everyone can see themselves here at Google. I refer to the fact that we can be intimidating as a brand, and there's so many urban legends and myths about our hiring process. So we are doubling down on that. We've done a lot of work to address this from our branding, but it's also very much about lifting the lid on how we hire and sharing the real stories of people at Google, real Googlers, and getting out there in the events and marketing and our university outreach. University outreach is an area where we've expanded our outreach from 75 schools to over 800 schools. And that's only a good thing because we're saying there is talent everywhere and we are the organization that's going to seek it out. We've also looked at our job descriptions, David, to reduce bias, to attract more representative pipelines. And this research was conducted about 18 months ago. We looked at over 6,000 jobs, looking at everything from language to word count. And now we have a tool that works out the best practice for us with unbiased job specs. Many of my colleagues in various industries will be calling me to ask about this all the time, because this is kind of utopia where people want to get to. But at the end of the day, the most important thing for us is holding ourselves accountable to breaking down barriers. These barriers to access. We focus in and we zero in on our hiring teams. We focus in on hiring managers and make sure that we have a pure, unadulterated competency framework for interview. So this means that the questions that we ask, the questions that we put forward, and our assessments are based on the absolute need to have those competencies for that role. And I think this is another critical point that not only enhances your experience when you come in to meet with us, but really underscores our mission when we think about diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Absolutely. And, as a director, I've got a team of nearly 100 people, and I can honestly say, Ola, that the initiatives that you've put in place are really being felt at our end. We're constantly hiring, and the enthusiasm with which our hiring managers have really embraced those programs to say, actually, yeah, I want to be better, I want to be part of the solution, is absolutely key. But you talked about how we are rooted in data, which is true. We're Google, it's in our blood. But for many of the things that we'd like to do, data isn't always available. It may not be immediately available. In some cases, it may never become available. So Geoff, how should we be working in the absence of data, where data perhaps is not able to inform us on every decision?
Yeah, and this is an interesting one for our company culture, given that we are known externally and internally for being so heavily data-driven. But it's if you think about it, this is an area where even if we have the data, it's going to be in the large, or it might be delayed, or just might not exist. And I think we need to make sure that we're biasing for action regardless. So, for example, as Ola mentioned, we have company-wide data as well as self-reported data that works for us in the aggregate to show the progress. However, when you get to the level of an individual manager, say, who manages just a handful of people, how should they be thinking about whether or not to do something about equity? And here I think it's reasonable that assuming that doing nothing is just not sufficient. And we believe it's the responsibility of leaders to actively work to increase equitable outcomes for their teams. And as we've talked a bit about, some of it is just showing up as an ally. Some of it is time investing in being an equitable leader for decision making and allocation of opportunities. And I think I see this as a very similar to the discussion that's being had around being, I'm not racist, versus being actively anti-racist. And I think for many of the challenges where it's like, I haven't seen the data, is another way of saying, I haven't seen a problem and therefore there isn't a problem. And I think we've seen more than enough data and heard more than enough stories to know that there is a problem. And so in the absence of data, we really need to bias towards action.
Thank you, Geoff. Amazing. And so we're talking about biasing to action. So if I was a new CEO, right, and I've got limited resources, so I can't do everything. I'm certainly not as big as Google, but I'm passionate about inclusion, right? So as people who've been in this field for a while now, what should I do first, and what should I not do? What should I not expend my valuable resources on?
Well, David, I'm going to start with what should I not do? So my advice would be, don't jump into action. Okay, start with education. Take stock, educate yourself before you jump into action. As a leader, the words you say matter, and they have the power to engage or disenfranchise. And I know we've all seen examples of both, and I know which camp we'd all rather be in. I'd also say be mindful of how you educate yourself. Don't expect the Black individuals in your business to educate you. If that is not their role, I see that as transferring the burden. I'd love to say Google it, but in all seriousness, there's so many great books and podcasts, YouTube, etc., available on the subject. We are so lucky to be in this moment in time where there's so many resources. Also, you can look at how are other companies doing this. I know for a fact that Google shares a lot about how we are approaching this work externally, and you can use this as your starting point. Then, as you say, if you have limited resources, look across the key areas. There's hiring, there's progression, there's retention, and culture. Think about what you can do without resources or minimal resources, and then decide on priorities. What do you need to do now? What can you put on a future roadmap? I think that kind of framework is really helpful. And finally, and I think perhaps most importantly, role model the behaviors you want to see in your organization. Hold yourself accountable, hold others accountable, and send clear messages to your teams that this work is important and what you expect from them, whether it be ensuring they have representative slates in hiring or that they are ensuring equity and access to opportunities and progression. It starts with you and it ends with you. That is the leadership mantle.
Thank you, Ola. I absolutely agree. And nothing to me sends a clearer message than the CEO or the leaders role modeling and speaking very clearly and passionately about the issue, and setting the tone which other leaders can follow. So Geoff, perhaps you would like to jump in and add to that. What would you suggest that a CEO should really be focusing on?
First, hire Ola as an advisor, and second, I think it's really hard to add anything extra here, but I think the real key is to recognize your responsibility as a leader in setting the tone for your organization. I think, as you were both mentioning, it really comes down to role modeling what you want to see within your org. And the other critical piece is around education and making sure that you're understanding the challenges that underrepresented groups face, the challenges coming from your teams, but also clearly taking action and visibly taking action. And this needs to be seen both in the small details. So this could be calling out offensive remarks as unacceptable, through to much larger efforts such as ensuring the systems in your company are unbiased and that you have proactive measures in place to be inclusive. And this could include making it an early priority to hire a senior lead that is responsible for diversity and inclusion, in addition to your own actions as a lead. And as Ola mentioned, making sure that minority groups are advisors. They're not responsible for your education as the CEO, and they're not responsible for fixing systems that you may have inadvertently made not great, and that you need to look to the majority to be the executors on driving the change through allyship and through other programs.
Brilliant. Thank you, Geoff. And you make some really good points there. And in particular, when the CEO or a leader intervenes and actually says, hey, that's not how we do things here, or, what are you doing to fix X? It sends out a message to everyone, doesn't it? It's not just the person in the room, but that story then goes through of, hey, this is being taken seriously. And it's the tone that can be set is so important. And so, one of the key things in driving this movement is really sort of at its heart is building inclusive teams, right? At the end of the day, we work at a team level in teams. And so, Geoff, perhaps you could kick us off about talking a bit about sort of why is this, and we talked a little bit about this earlier, but why is inclusion important for design? And specifically, were there any times where you saw a product built by an unbalanced team? And what were the challenges and consequences of this?
It's an interesting question. The designing products is inherently a complex process. And one of the key challenges you've got with a set of constrained resources or constrained amount of time and effort you can put into anything is being able to determine what's valuable to your users. And often the stumbling block is not even knowing who your users are. And you can get some of the way there by having good practices around user research, survey, but I think real deep product empathy comes from having the problem yourself that your product is designed to solve. And the best way to make that happen is to have a diverse team of people involved in building the product, as then you're increasing the likelihood that a member of the team spots something that you may not have seen or no one else on the team may have seen before it is launched. It's much more painful to get that feedback once you've gone through the challenges of building something and launching, to hear that from your users after the fact. I haven't got a particular example from an unbalanced team, but I can share an example where we were a bit proactive. In a recent redesign of the YouTube Studio, we signed up for compliance with the highest standard of accessibility at Google, internally known as GAR4. And what this means is that all primary and secondary user journeys are accessible, and accessible to people that may have to use, say, screen readers due to visual impairment. And so even though YouTube is a video product, we do actually have quite a few creators that are visually impaired. And so ensuring that our upload flows and our account management tools are fully supported with screen readers means that they're able to contribute to and succeed on the platform. And that's certainly something that without programs in place like this, we would not have been able to, or we just would not have been aware of within the team.
That's amazing, Geoff. Thank you. So Ola, can you offer some advice on building inclusive teams to drive this success?
Yes, that was amazing, Geoff. I'm happy to, David. I'm really glad we're talking about the I in DEI. I really think it matters because by creating an inclusive culture, we empower and encourage everyone to contribute. And in an industry like ours, in a market like ours, that leads to even more innovation, more creativity, and better solutions for our teams and users. So we tend to think of 3 levers in particular to build inclusive teams. You first want to make sure that you foster a culture of respect. Like that is integral to moving forward. Secondly, you want to create equal opportunity for everyone in your team to succeed. And then thirdly, you want to invite and integrate diverse perspectives. And I think that's just a great case study that Geoff just shared with us, where all 3 of those elements were included, and no wonder it was successful.
Yeah, and I love those points, Ola. And I'll just share a little anecdote that I heard recently because it speaks to those so well. But I was chatting to Anugla, someone who'd recently joined Google. And I said, what have you discovered that you love about Google? And she said, oh, wow, it's great. When I'm in a meeting, we don't always agree, but everyone's so respectful. And they all share their points and we all discuss things through. And I really feel able to contribute. I got to say that really lit me up. It's part of what I believe is so special about culture, this feeling that your voice is heard and that you belong. Is definitely the I in inclusion. So Geoff, let's move on to educating our teams. You talked quite a lot about sort of, doing nothing is not okay. You have to be active now. When you think about educating your team on anti-racism approaches, what are some of the approaches you've taken, and why is it so important for other leaders to host and to actively support these anti-racism programs for their teams?
Yeah, firstly, it's a matter of publicly committing to my own education. As a leader, it's not sufficient just to educate yourself. You have to be visible that you're educating yourself. And I shared with my team the books that I've been reading and some of the work that I've been doing. And this helps set the tone that this is an expected behavior. The second thing I've been doing is getting involved in some of the Google-wide efforts to contribute actively to anti-racism. And this further sets the tone of this is the type of work that I would expect people in my org to be taking on. Thirdly is just talking to people. And the way that we went with this was we hosted discussion groups based around books that we'd been reading. And so we picked, I think, 4 books from memory, where we read them and then set up discussion groups. And part of my role was to encourage this and also to lead some of the discussion sessions. And so we had one that I remember recently around the Just Mercy book, which was a great one to get people started, because for those that don't enjoy reading, there's a movie. And some of the discussion was just comparing the book to the movie. But it was also touched on a number of hard and emotional topics. Finally, we got a whole bunch of internal training programs for employees and managers that help establish a set of basic standards. And one of the things I've been doing as a lead is just making sure that our team has completed them. And this is one of those boring tasks of management where you kind of just need to check and go through and make sure that it's happening. But I think it also helps set the tone. The reason I think it's important for leaders to actively support some anti-racism efforts is not doing so sends the signal that everything's okay. And we've clearly seen that it is not. And we've spent way too many years where this has been unaddressed in the industry. And we've made a lot of progress with women in engineering, so that we do know we can make a difference when we focus on these sorts of things. And it is up to us to make these improvements.
It's amazing to see leaders like Geoff who are really leaning in and owning the problem and taking it on themselves to really make the changes. So Ola, what does allyship mean to you as a Black woman?
It means, the definition for allyship for me is that you recognize and understand that you have a unique privilege, and that you're using that unique privilege to lift up others. We all have privilege, but there's a specific place for making sure that even in the small things, like how you show up in a particular moment. I have seen some great examples of allyship here. This call is one example of that. But I've also witnessed and seen missed opportunities where we can be making sure that all voices are heard. Calling out when someone is not being listened to or when someone is spoken over. It's a simple thing, but it really does matter. And then there are those examples of allyship for those who do hold significant power or privilege. And that is when we've already touched on this. It looks like holding your leaders accountable for having a representative bench or representative slate of candidates, and role modeling the behaviors that you expect to see in your organization, or the level of the investment that you make in resources to address these issues. I'd sound a note of caution. True allyship should not be worn as a badge of honor that people use to promote themselves by. An ally should not seize the moment to center themselves. It's about centering the individual or the group that they are working alongside or supporting. For us in staffing, we know we have a unique privilege. We understand that. It means that we need to use our position, our power, our access, or any other advantage that we have to create a more meaningful workplace, and by proxy, a more meaningful world for all. That's truly the heart of our commitment in this space.
Yeah, amazing. Geoff?
Yeah, so a recent discussion we've been having internally is changing the term from being an ally to the act of allyship. And I think this shift from noun to verb is critical, because it's that shift of passiveness to action. And this is very similar to the discussion that's being had around being anti-racist. And it's, I think, touches on what Ola's talking about in terms of identity. It's not a badge of honor to say, oh, I'm not racist. It's something where you need to actively work to change the systems and cultures that have resulted in that haven't resulted in equitable outcomes for everybody. And it's really not the responsibility of underrepresented groups to change the system. This is the responsibility of the majority, particularly those in leadership. And this is why it's so important to encourage, amplify, and channel the wave of allyship that has emerged. And this is how we're going to enact meaningful change. And I think it's the thing that I think I mentioned earlier, I'm most positive about, in that we're seeing more and more people engage in acts of allyship. I think it's an area where storytelling is incredibly powerful and important. Where an open discussion of racism is also matters. It's going to help tip those who are on the edge towards actively participating as allies. The biggest challenge I see is getting the silent majority to listen. And this requires someone that they are already attuned to telling them that it's important, and thus encouraging them to start their journey towards allyship, and brings us full circle back to the importance of us modeling the behavior as leads.
Brilliant. And thank you, Geoff. And thank you so much. I think you've really landed on the important points there. And, it really does come back to the behaviors and the actions that we role model as leaders and as allies. Not just educating ourselves, but being really open about that and encouraging others to follow that path. And then actively addressing the systems, right, that we need to address through those acts of allyships, but also through the instructions that we give to our teams, as well as what we role model. So I want to thank you, Ola and Geoff, not just for the time you've given us today, but also just for the actions that you yourselves have taken in this space and your continued commitment to this. I know this is something you're both very passionate about, but it's also something that you bring to Google every day, and we're really grateful for that. I would also like to thank you, the viewer, the listener, for your time and your patience listening to us. So if you are interested in learning more about how to join us here, please visit careers.google.com. And otherwise, do continue just checking in with us at careersonairwithgoogle.com, just to see other ways in which we can all continue to connect and keep this journey moving forward. Thank you so much for your time, and I hope to see you at Google. Goodbye.